Hi everyone, welcome to SEMA. This is our 10th SEMA in our series. Today we're lucky to have Jason Ringas with us. Jason is a Rife researcher and historian. We're very lucky to have Jason here with us. 30 years experience and hands-on, so he's a true expert. Welcome aboard, Jason.
Thank you, John, and hello to all the other Rifers listening.
Now, we're hoping to twist Jason's arm and have him on several shows. Today we're going to focus on Royal Rife, his early years, and really focus on the man himself. Many people know about his achievements, his equipment, but not many people realize the background behind that, and just the many different interests that Royal Rife had. He wasn't just interested in what we know as Rife machines, which are the plasma machines. He had many other interests and hobbies. But Jason, I'd like you to explain to the viewers now what were Royal Rife's interests and hobbies?
Well, he had a variety of interests and hobbies. He was an expert marksman. He used to go, I think, on hunting expeditions. He was a very talented musician, which some people had said was part of the reason why his keen sense of hearing when he would use the headphones for tuning the machines. He was, of course, interested in racing. He held for the longest, a very long period of time, a powerboat speed record. He was into astronomy and was working on a telescope that used some of the optical principles of his microscope. And kind of interesting letter where Dr. Johnson once was kind of telling him to, when he was diverting some attention to the telescope, he was saying something to the effect that the stars will always be there, right? We have other things to do. So yeah, he'd and that's how also he came to the attention of Mr. Timken, because he was very good mechanically and with engines. And so the powerboat that he built and raced was Mr. Timken's. So he was into a lot of different things, not just scientific research.
Now, Mr. Timken, did he finance a lot of Royal Rife's early research?
Yes, him and his sister, who was Amelia Bridges, because as the story was told that on the production line for making the ball bearings that Timken is known for, and the roller bearings, they were having problems with flaws in the steel. And so Rife reportedly designed and built an X-ray machine that was on the line, and so it would be X-raying the steel as it went by, and when a flaw was found, then an alarm would sound and they'd stop the line, cut that section out, and continue on. And so he saved Timken, millions of dollars in production costs. So because of that, they set him up for life, as it was. And that's where he sort of earned their patronage.
That's fascinating. I was just wondering, Jason, in that X-ray machine, I wonder what sort of tube they used.
Well, back then it was the standard, I guess, the Coolidge type X-ray tubes, but there isn't a lot of details. It was just an anecdote that Henry Steiner had mentioned in the 50s when they interviewed him, and he told the story, and he said, they set him up for life, and so that's how he was able to do what he did, because he had the patronage of some very wealthy people.
Yes, and his interest in music and his ability to tell notes. He had very good hearing and a good sense of tuning, and that certainly would have been a very good skill, in his development of his frequency machines.
Yes, and also because the way they worked back then, where you had to, the regenerative type systems, you had to tune it, to a right point to get the thing to go into oscillation. And so, you have to be able to hear well.
Yes. It sounds like Royal Rife didn't really specialize in one thing, but had quite a broad area of expertise, because to design a racing boat engine, you need to know an awful lot about an awful lot of things.
Yes, people, have referred to him as a Renaissance type of man. Back then it seems like, there were people that were skilled and knowledgeable in a very broad variety of fields. And when you're in that situation, you can do things that other people can't because they don't have the expertise.
Right, right. Mm. Do, why do you think Royal Rife started working on a medical device? What do you think was his personal motive for that?
Well, I don't know about his, if he had a personal motive, but he said that he gave up his initial training to go into research work because he decided that research was more important. And I'm sure that, he had seen his share of sickness
Yes.
in family and around. I mean, everybody is exposed to ill health, and some people that have the drive to go in that direction.
Right. Um, what was his formal training?
Yeah, as I said, he said that his initial training was at Johns Hopkins University, and he was studying to be a surgeon. And I think
Wow.
he was going to specialize in eye surgery, because he said I'm a surgeon, but he said he gave it up to go into research work. But they said that some of the operations that he used to perform on the experimental animals was some of the finest surgical technique that you would ever see. So he learned a few things, and I'm sure as far as mechanical type stuff, I'm sure he picked up. His father reportedly was a mechanical engineer, so he
Okay.
may have learned some things from his father. He was raised by his aunt because his mother died when he was, I think, eight months old,
Oh
and
dear.
so I guess his father couldn't take care of him himself, so he brought him to his sister to take care of him.
Gosh. He sounds like a man who's was always thirsty for knowledge. He would observe.
Yes, yes, those types of people, they like to know things. Yeah.
Yes. Well, one thing which our viewers would be no doubt very interested in is what the very first Rife machines were like. I'm thinking more like, he does a lot, he's made a lot of things in his lifetime, but his treatment machines, what his very first ones were like.
The first machine I would describe as very crude. He said he worked with the old original loose couplers. And
Yes.
if you can see on eBay, I don't know if he was referring to the medical induction coils or whether he was referring to the loose coupler radio receivers, but they're very, you can buy vintage ones on eBay. And the induction coils, it's like a coil within a coil that you slide it in and out to change the setting, and it has an interrupter, that's like a buzzer, and very crude instrument, but all accounts are that he had some initial success which prompted him to move forward with it.
Did the loose coupler introduce a high voltage into a plasma tube? Is that
Yes,
the...
those types of machines, I think they call it faradic current. So it's like a sharp spike and then it decays. Um,
Yes.
and that's possibly why in the lab film when John Crane was narrating it, he said that the spikes that you see are the portion that kill the virus or the bacteria.
Yes.
Um, there's there's still unanswered questions about the actual mechanism, but the point is that he had enough initial success to keep moving forward. If he didn't, then he would have been stuck. He wouldn't have been able to proceed.
That's right. And the what sort of gas tubes did he use at that time?
The same type that we make replicas today, the Coolidge type X-ray tubes, but he filled it with a gas because he was actually working conceptually like an X-ray machine, where you have the energy driving into the target and producing some sort of ray. Now, he obviously didn't want to produce X-rays, so that's why he added the gas, and he claimed that it acted as a partial directional antenna. Whether that's accurate or not is a question that perhaps needs to be answered, but I think there has been some indication that that is actually correct.
Okay. And so with the tubes that are used by him and by people now, do they produce any X-rays?
No, you can't. To produce X-rays, you have to have an extremely hard vacuum and very high voltage. Neither of which the Rife frequency instruments do, because once you introduce a gas, and then it becomes like a constant voltage device.
Yes.
I myself, one of the tubes that I had, I measured it once with a neon sign transformer, and it was 270 volts. You're not going to get X-rays with something like that.
Okay. And is the gas important, the gas type that's inside the tube?
Possibly, because Rife said that they didn't care about the color of the light that the tube produced, but he claimed that helium worked better than the other gases, that it stood up to the bombardment. Now, helium has the highest ionization potential of all the gases, and the lowest mass. So it's possible that gas type is important. On the other hand, there are other people that have used different gases that claim to have gotten results as well. So, that's an avenue for further research.
Some manufacturers now, they're adding a little bit of mercury into the gas to make the gas bright. Well, Jason, it makes the gas very bright as it ionizes, as I'm sure you're aware of.
That's if you're looking to impress people, but I wouldn't put mercury. Well, with the mercury, then you're going to have more ultraviolet light, which is a concern. I mean, the gases themselves may produce a small amount of ultraviolet light, but if you put mercury in it, well, not only is that going to lower the ionization potential inside the tube, so you're not going to have as strong an electric field, but Rife didn't do that. Why, if we're trying to follow through and trying to replicate what Rife did, why would you want to fundamentally deviate like that?
Right. Is the glass type important with these tubes?
Probably not. It could be, because one of the tubes that Rife used, it looked like a double bubble tube, and it's called a Pifford safety tube. And that was made out of leaded glass, except for the one face part where the target shoots out, and that was quartz. So it had a quartz window, but the rest of it was leaded glass.
Yes.
I don't know if it's that important. Leaded glass could be an issue in the direction that you're pointing it, but the other parts might be okay. Some people use soda lime glass. Some people use Pyrex. Some people use pure quartz. There have been some anecdotes of positive results with all those types of glasses. So probably not that big of a deal.
I've seen old historical photos of Royal Rife using conical flasks, which is quite a clever, out of the box way of making a flask that can be easily refilled.
But actually, I have heard, the ones with the flat bottoms, the Erlenmeyer flasks, I heard that they don't work too good, because I think the pulsing of the plasma can knock the bottom out of it if it's strong enough. It might be better to keep it as a globe.
I understand. And there are some flasks which have got a circular base, the
Yes.
ones that are for Bunsen burners.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, one of the questions, we asked our viewers to ask questions before this video, and one of the questions was a real doozer, and it's going to probably take a while answering, but um, this, this, this person asked, why aren't Rife machines popular now, or as popular as they could be?
Well, anything that's not in the mainstream is known by less people, obviously.
Yes.
Uh, Now, why isn't Rife in the mainstream? I mean, a variety of reasons, but it has, I don't think it's a point to be argued. It's been relegated to the status of medical quackery. And
Mm.
so people that are more conservative in their approaches shy away from that type of stuff.
Right.
But there are more and more people that are at least aware of Rife. Maybe not people actively pursuing it and using frequencies and machines and all that, but more and more people are aware of what happened. They just don't know really what to do about it.
Okay. In my view, it is a shame that more people aren't at least aware of the
Mhm.
principles of frequency application, even if we don't associate that with Rife, but frequency application, because it's common sense that if you shake something hard enough, something's going to happen. And,
Yeah, yeah. Yeah,
and so,
well, back in Rife's day, that's actually part of the reason I think that why he pursued that avenue is because electrotherapy was very popular back then, right? There's electrotherapy machines that are hand cranked that go back to the American Civil War era. So, people like to get zapped once in a while, I guess.
I've heard tales of people lying across railway tracks which are electrified to get
Mhm.
treatments for malaria. I don't know how
Well,
safe it is. You'd have to be pretty sure of the timetables in that time.
Well, in ancient times, they would have them stand on I can't remember the name of the fish, but with the electric fish, they'd stand on the thing to get shock for pain relief, that sort of thing. And the so-called Baghdad battery, they have speculated that maybe the medicine men back then were using the ancient batteries to do the same sort of thing as what the electric fish was doing.
Gosh.
Yeah.
So this really nothing's new, but it's just got to be relearned again, I guess.
And it has been observed, like when people sometimes when they get struck by lightning, and then they get cured. I think even Dr. Stafford said his wife got struck by lightning. It hit the tree outside of the bedroom, and then deflected and went in and hit her in the back. And
Gosh.
I think she may have had cancer at the time. I don't recall the exact details, but it hit her in back and sent her flying. But I think it cured her. Yeah.
She had a bit of recovery recovery time after that.
Yeah.
Yeah, quite an incident.
Excuse me.
To the best of your knowledge, Jason, do you know of any formal institution that is using the principles of Royal Rife?
No, I don't know of any. I
Yeah.
I've wondered about that. Like I'm sure there's somebody somewhere doing some quiet research. Well, I guess I can't say I'm sure because I don't know, but I would be surprised if there wasn't somebody doing some research. Enough knowledge of it, and there's also other types of electrotherapy. Like there's that type in Israel where they apply the parallel electric wires and expose it to electric fields. So I think that there is some research. They probably wouldn't acknowledge Rife on it, but um, most of this has been grassroots, just individual people trying to research it for themselves.
Now, behind you, Jason, I see two very, very interesting machines. I was wondering if you could explain to people what they are.
Okay, so this here is a picture of the universal microscope. That was the third microscope that he built. Um, and it was adapted. That was specifically for his own use. It was adapted for every type of microscopy. Okay, okay, maybe even move over. And okay, you see the angles right there. These things, those are the prisms in there. So that zigzags the light rays, and what that does is that has the effect of extending the length of the tube without increasing the physical size, or else you'd have to stand up to look through the eyepieces. So that was his, and so the longer the tube length, the greater the magnification that you could get. The other one here, that is the number 4 microscope, and that was originally intended to be commercially manufactured so that other researchers could buy it and use it. That, I think, had a maximum magnification of 17,000, whereas this could go up to 31,000, and I think later on they even boosted it even higher. But most of the work that Rife did was between 6 and 11,000 times magnification, because once you get past that, it's much more difficult to handle it, right? Just the slightest little movement of the organism, the vertical movement in the puddle on the slide, could throw it out of focus as well. So most of their work was done at, 6 to 11,000 times.
Are these microscopes still around?
The number 2 microscope, I believe, was bought by the late Lynn Kenny. It was in pieces. The number 3 still exists somewhere, not in working operation. The number 5, of course, is in the London Science Museum, which I've personally seen back in 1996. There was a Dutch film crew for some science show in Holland, and they came and interviewed us. And then Stuart Andrews, who of the late Stuart Andrews of the UK, had located the microscope, and then we went there, and the film crew went there as well, and we filmed it. And yeah, that's not working either. So none of the Rife microscopes that still exist, they don't work.
That's a shame. Why don't they work?
Well, I think there's some parts missing. People don't know how to set them up to like for instance, was it the number 4 microscope went to London back before the war, and it was jarred during shipment, and they had to do a transatlantic telephone call, and Rife had to guide Henry Seiner into realigning the prisms to get it to work. I'm sure some parts have been cannibalized or stolen. You have to have an optical expert that understands what it, how it operates, so that he could set it up.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So Royal Rife, he was an expert marksman. He invented the world's fastest racing boat engine. He designed the world's most powerful microscope, and he invented a way of treating people and curing incurable diseases. Yes, he was quite a remarkable man. In some ways, his interests sort of linked together. His expertise in mechanics would have been useful when he was making the microscopes, and the microscopes would have been useful for his treatments. Did he use the microscopes in testing his frequency machines?
Well, yes, that's the foundation of the testing, is that as he describes it himself, he says, I put a pure culture of the organism under the microscope, and then I tune this thing. He says, until I find a frequency that'll destroy it. Then he would zero the machine, put a fresh culture, try it again. Yes. He said, if I can do it 10 or 12 consecutive times after the machine has been zeroed, then I can record that. So and now you don't have to have a Rife microscope. If you're working with bacteria, you can use a conventional, regular microscope. But he was the basis of the frequency research was his observations under the microscope.
Yes. Okay. The frequencies that he found that were effective against certain diseases and microorganisms, he recorded them, did he, in some notebook? Or
Yes. He had a lab notebook. We have copies of 27 lab notes. 24 of them have frequencies listed, but there's a little bit of confusion the way that they were recorded. And then when they constructed the later machine, and with a little bit better technology, they read the frequencies, and they're different. So the original measurements of the wavelengths and frequencies of the old machines are probably mistaken.
okay. Would those frequencies that we have now be still effective? Because we're talking, many years, 80 or so years.
We simply don't know. They might be, they might not be. The only way you could find that out is if you tested it. Simple. You can take. I've championed the idea for a long time. Just he had a frequency for E. coli bacteria. Anybody can see it with a regular microscope. Test it out. See if it works. If it doesn't, why doesn't it work? Is it a little bit off, or is it completely changed? We don't know. But testing is the only way to know.
Okay. And have people reported back with modern, equipment with the accuracy of today, whether his frequencies do seem to work with their machines?
We don't know. There has been some research, nothing conclusive. I have heard, anecdotes of people having successfully destroyed bacteria under the microscope. I would like to see something that's reproducible so that all the rest of us can try it out and see it. Because if you can do it over in China, but I can't do it over here in Canada, well, that doesn't work. It has to be reproducible.
Okay. Well, we've if you Google the word rife now, you'll get something. You get 1 or 2 results back, 1 or 2 billion results. So there's a lot of equipment out there at the moment. And are these machines Rife machines? Are they similar to what Royal Rife is using?
Well, if somebody tells me that they have a Rife machine, my response is prove it. Simple as that. That's why, I've argued the point for many years that the technology that a machine is constructed with isn't the determining factor of whether it's a Rife machine. The determining factor is in the demonstration. If you can't demonstrate your machine to do what Rife claimed he could do with his machines, then it isn't properly called a Rife machine. Simple as that. I mean, it may be clinically effective. You may be able to get a lot of benefit of it, but it's simply not a Rife machine.
Right. If a contact machine, for example, Jason, was effective in killing germs, and the frequencies that Royal Rife used were shown to be effective against the target pathogens, would that be called a Rife machine?
If you could objectively demonstrate that it, as we'll use the term, devitalizes bacteria the way Rife did, then whether it's a plasma tube or a contact machine, I don't think anyone today really cares. They just want something that does what Rife claimed it can do.
Okay. So I guess what you're saying, Jason, is not so important to put a label on something. It's really looking at how effective it is and whether it does what it's purported to do.
Yeah, it has to produce the results because, people today with all types of machines, even off-the-shelf function generators, and they put some handholds, they get some therapeutic effects. And that's great. But It's not the same thing of what we're looking for with a so-called Rife machine. Rife described a specific methodology and effect that his machine produced, and a machine has to be able to produce that and demonstrate it objectively the way Rife did. If you can't
Right.
do that, then, in my opinion, you shouldn't be calling it a Rife machine. I understand, though, I do understand that the manufacturers of machines, calling it Rife, including the name Rife, but to some degree, to the so-called uninitiated, that creates confusion. Because just like when I first started in this field, I read Barry Lyne's book and I read about the Rife machine and that it could do this and that, and I wanted to buy a Rife machine, just like everybody
Yes.
else. Then it turned out that I learned that the machines that were on the market at that time weren't the same as what Rife was doing.
Mhm.
So I held back. That's it.
Did Royal Rife ever try using anything other than a plasma tube for transmitting frequencies?
I don't know. I don't know if he, because as I said, he was working conceptually on the basis of X-ray. So he was thinking of some sort of ray, and he claimed that the so-called Rife ray was 17 times more penetrating than X-ray. So why would he say 17 times? I assume that he did some test that demonstrated that it was 17 times more penetrating than X-ray. So
Mm.
that, we don't, he didn't, maybe he didn't try other things. Maybe there was patents that needed to be avoided. We don't know. Um, uh, but I think the non-contact method has its definite advantages.
Yes. I read at one time that he had to change the design of his machines because they were broadcasting across radio frequencies.
Well, the original Rife machines were essentially AM radio transmitters. That's all they were. But instead of broadcasting from an antenna, they were using the plasma tube. Now, if you look at some of the photographs where they have really long leads from the transmitter to the plasma tube, well, those are going to broadcast as well. So I think it was 1934 is when the FCC first started, and radio was getting more popular, and so the frequency spectrums had to be controlled. So they would send a guy in a car down the road tuned to the certain frequency, and they'd put a tone on it to see how far it would splatter. And he said once that they used to raise the devil with the frequency machine with all the radio receivers that are around. You know.
I suppose if many households had those sorts of transmitters, will be playing havoc on the people wanting to listen to the radio stations.
That's it, because back then there wasn't any television and everybody listened to the radio. So um, yeah, that could be a problem.
But couldn't they have used a different type of cable going to the tube, perhaps a shielded cable?
Well, I don't know if they had coax back then. I'm sure that with greater and as the technology improved, then I think it's less of a problem. Like there's been some tests of machines built today where you walk off the back of the porch and then you can no longer detect the signal. So there is methods of doing it. Back then it was different because that technology was pretty crude by today's standards.
Yes. Um, and I heard of one clinic in Greece that used a radio aerial, it's pure radio transmission to broadcast frequencies, and they're broadcasting around the 100 kilohertz range. They used to change from hotel to hotel to sort of keep away from the authorities. But in your opinion, would that type of transmission device, that method, work, disregarding the legalities of it, whether there be the strength in the radio signal?
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, I would have to see some sort of experimental evidence. I mean, it's certainly possible that that they came up with a system that it works. For instance, diathermy machines, they work with metallic pads, and it's just an electric field. And if you use pulse diathermy, you can get all kinds of good results. Uh, if they're doing something similar, you could get results.
Okay, it's amazing. Um, if someone wanted to make their own Rife machine, if someone wanted to make like if they didn't have much money, they didn't want to have to buy a commercial device, and if they called you up, Jason, like how would you suggest they make a cheap machine that has got that may produce results?
A cheap machine? I don't know how, like I'm not an engineer. So, as far as designing your own machine, you could follow some of the publicly available information that's modeled after the older type of machines. But as far as, you would still have to accumulate all the parts, which would still set you back, a fair amount of money. Um,
Mm,
I think, though, people have to do the best they can with what they have to work with, right? If you have
yes.
just a low cost little frequency generator, some vintage function generator, you do the best you can with what you have. If you're in a position to get something better or to design or build, there's some very, very intelligent people that are, in the so-called Rife community that, can build all kinds of things. The average person, they basically need to buy a machine.
Okay.
Yeah.
Um,
Or they could go to somebody that has a machine. I mean, there are people that have what they call chat houses, and they have the machine there, and people come over and they run frequencies. There's situations like that, but there are some alternative type, naturopaths, that sort of thing, that use frequency machines. But if you're treating especially some sort of serious illness, I think it's best that you have a machine of your own.
okay. Um, are there any advantages of the Rife method of treating diseases over mainstream medicine?
Oh, yeah. Well, think about it this way. Um, we have antibiotics for bacteria and antifungals, antivirals. But when you're using a chemical against an organism, you're dealing with it on its level because chemistry is its business and it's designed to adapt. So that's why we have the problem with antibiotic resistant germs. It's because that's what they're designed to do. They adapt to different chemical environments. When you blast it with an electric field or, some sort of electrical energy, you're taking it out of its element. It can't adapt to that. And so that, I think, is the primary advantage, and cost, of course, because if you were able to use an electronic device that could be used for any microorganism, then you wouldn't have to spend all that money on antibiotics and antivirals.
That makes sense. It makes sense. It's hard to become accustomed to an electric shock. It hurts,
Well, when you're dealing with radio frequency fields, then you don't really feel it there. So, when you get the so-called zap, that's when you're using lower frequencies, which are within the frequency response range of the human nervous system. And that's why you feel them. Once you crank it up beyond that, then you don't feel it.
But the bugs should hopefully feel them.
Well, the bugs, hopefully they do.
Yeah. Now, when I read through historical records of Royal Rife, um, I read how he lost a lot of his documentation. If the documentation was lost, that begs the question, how do we know that we're following his methods if we haven't got the records of the earlier years?
Well, there is sufficient information that has survived that can guide us in the right direction. Um, and that's how I've generally looked at the historical information, is that that is just a foundation to guide us in the right direction so that we can do new, modern research to reestablish it. And then we won't need to refer to the old information anymore. That hasn't really happened the way that I would like, but there is enough information, but people haven't really with few exceptions, people haven't really followed through on the information that we do have.
Okay, so that needs to be done really. People need to look again, possibly through different eyes, at the information that we have. And
Well, the thing is that a lot of people that I've dealt with over the years, it seems like they're more interested in promoting their own pet ideas and philosophies and mindsets, and then sort of riding it on top of the subject of Rife, whereas it actually has nothing to do with Rife. Yeah.
So you've been researching and studying Rife, Royal Rife's life and his equipment for 30 odd years.
Now you made me feel old.
Well, you don't actually look 30, but we'll let our viewers decide. But what I was going to ask was, have you found, what were the obstacles you found whilst you're doing your research? Was it smooth sailing, or did you find that there are sometimes?
Especially probably not. So to some degree it still exists, but there was some people were secretive, like even John Crane, there was stuff that he held back. I don't believe that he understood as much as he let on. But we tried to accumulate, as much information we could and put it out there so that others can take it and run with it. Because as far as obstacles to moving the Rife research forward, it's a question of resources, expertise. I mean, we need professionals involved in this, not just amateurs like myself and others, because the professionals are the ones that have the resources and expertise to take this full circle. And to a large degree, I would also say that we, the Rife community, are an obstacle to moving this forward, because we're just, as my old shop teacher used to say, we're just hacking and hoping. We're arguing about all kinds of irrelevant details, and nobody is, picking up on it and following through the way Rife described. Everybody's trying to change the narrative and give different definitions to things that are clearly defined. And when you have that situation, then it muddies the water. Whereas we need clarity so that we can have more credibility to present it to professionals who could take it and run with it and take it to the finale.
A researcher at the moment, Anthony Holland, he's doing just that, I believe. He's doing solid research to try and find, well, he's, killing cancer one cell at a time, he puts it. He's got the energy which I think is required to hopefully change mainstream. And he's had some very positive results.
Well, I certainly hope Anthony succeeds and wish him all the best, but killing cancer cells isn't the same thing of what Rife was doing. Rife wasn't targeting cancer cells. He was targeting what he called a virus, a specific microorganism that he found in a tumor that he believed was the cause of the tumor. So that's fundamentally different. And so you have to be very careful. And killing cancer cells in a petri dish, that's some specific cell line, That's a long way away from actually curing cancer as it exists in a human patient.
Mm.
Yeah. But it's a start, and I encourage everybody who's involved in research to press forward.
Mm. I was interested to find that Anthony Holland is also a professor of music, so he
Yeah.
shares a similar background to Royal Rife. He's got that ear for
Well,
tone.
it certainly doesn't hurt. Absolutely. I did have a criticism of Anthony. He did a spectrum analysis video of the frequency machine that he was using, and that actually was the impetus for me to study FFT spectrum analysis and to look deeper into that. And his conclusions are completely wrong on that video. And I pointed it out to him, but some people they're moving forward at such a pace that they can't stop and turn back and revisit things. Um, so you have to be very careful when you do research of this nature, because now they referenced his spectrum analysis video in one of the papers that he collaborated on, but that video that he did with the spectrum analysis, as far as I'm concerned, it only shows us what not to do. I mean, the conclusions are totally incorrect. Um, so caution is warranted, and when you're taking measurements of that nature, that and coming to certain conclusions that have important implications, you have to be careful with that.
Okay, but he has been having some success, and one thing I do admire Anthony for is pulling people together. At the
Yeah,
moment, the Rife community, in my mind, seems to be quite disjointed with arguments in this group and that group, and there's no collective
yeah.
movement. And really to make Rife more acceptable in mainstream medicine, we really need to group together and work as a force rather than a disjointed group of individuals.
Absolutely. Yeah, see, because I haven't been part of the forums for quite a long time, so I haven't been following. I've heard from others that there isn't much really going on. But yeah, if Anthony Holland can get people together and get some resources together and conduct some serious research, I'm all for it. Absolutely.
Mm. And he's definitely a man of energy because he's been doing it for quite a few years, and he
Yes.
never stops. He just keeps on going, a bit
Yeah.
like the Energizer rabbit, I guess.
Hmm.
Now, the Royal Rife, I'm struggling to like. There's so much that he was good at. Was there anything that he wasn't good at? Like, was there anything which he struggled with?
Um, he had a few quirks in the pronunciation of words. Like, for instance, instead of saying inoculate, he would say inoculate. Um,
Now, he's
instead
not
of
related
saying,
to George
yeah,
George Bush's.
no, instead of saying primordial, he would say premoidal. So that's some interesting quirks in his speech. But the thing about, okay, we accept, we understand he was a genius, very talented and but he was a man just like everyone else, and he was fallible. He wasn't perfect. It's highly unlikely that everything he did was successful, right? We don't want to deify him that he was infallible. So, um, yeah, he was just a man, just like everybody else.
Was the only flaw being some of his words, the way he pronounced them. I wish that
Well,
was my only flaw,
I
Jason.
actually, because and here's the thing, because John Crane, when he transcribed the audio interviews with Rife, because he was listening and he didn't understand what Rife meant, and so he wrote down premodal, that as a transcription instead of understanding that he was meaning primordial. Yeah.
It's funny.
Yeah.
Imagine if he had, a dictation software. If he was using a dictation software, we're
Uh,
stopping at many
yeah.
words. Now, in Rife's lifetime, in his early years, he was having success. He was having measurable success, and he could see that success and prove it with his microscopes. So, the million-dollar question, well, it's more than $1 million. Why wasn't this used? Wasn't it accepted by mainstream medicine? Why aren't hospitals and doctors using it now? Why isn't doctor clinics, why don't they have a Rife machine in the corner to fire up and give someone a quarter-hour treatment?
Well, I think that's a very complex issue. It's like, sometimes in the Rife community, we get caught up in conspiracy theories that it was just, a conspiracy, by the pharmaceutical interests and the AMA and that sort of thing. But I think there's more to the story. Rife, he didn't publish very much, right? He published that one paper that I'm aware of with Dr. Kendall, but he didn't publish a lot of his, he should have published his research every step of the way. They didn't have the advantage of his microscope at the time. So they couldn't, you have to have independent replication. So those are a couple of reasons. Rife himself, he said, I completed this research and handed it to them on a silver platter. They don't want it, right? And I think that's very naive. I mean, that's not the way the scientific establishment operates, right? You're not going to single-handed, if you think that you're going to single-handedly hand the cure for cancer to the medical establishment on a silver platter, I mean, you should go back to bed because you're dreaming. It's not going to happen. You have to publish every step of the way, and they have to independently replicate it. They have to understand what it is. I mean, there's an expression that says doctors are down on things they're not up on. So if you're talking about a radio frequency type of device and they're used to prescribing pharmaceutical drugs, well, that's completely out of their element. So they would have to get training on that sort of thing. But you're not going to get training if there's not published papers that explain all the scientific principles and show the evidence as well. So I think those issues, and aside of all the other greed and corruption and infighting, all the stuff that most people have heard of, I think it's a combination of all those factors that it just slips through the cracks.
I think it's quite expensive to get machines approved by the current medical system.
Yeah, now, it costs a fortune. Yeah, and that's why pharmaceutical drugs cost so much, and only the large pharmaceutical industries and, even companies that produce physical therapy devices, you have these big corporations that have the resources and the finances to get it through the approval process, so that and then they can recoup their costs. But if you have some small company that's making a frequency instrument, how are they going to go about that? I don't think that it's feasible for that.
Now, I believe Royal Rife did collaborate with a few medical doctors and researchers in this time. I guess maybe that was what he was hoping to get acceptance by the mainstream medical system if he did this. And he worked with a gentleman with Kendall. He was a Dr. Kendall, I believe. Did any of their research, their development, pass on to mainstream use now?
I don't believe so. The techniques that they used back then, like they used what are called Berkefeld filters to filter out the so-called filterable forms of the bacteria. Nowadays, they have more sophisticated filters and techniques that they use. So I think largely that kind of those kinds of techniques are obsolete now. However, I don't know about Kendall's medium. because that is a critical factor in culturing the so-called filterable forms. And I remember I went to a symposium back in, I think 2007. Was it? No, it might have been earlier. But anyway, went to a symposium and I photocopied Kendall's paper that talked about the medium, and I handed it out to a few people. I don't know if they ever made any and used it, but you have to. Okay, you can use modern filters to filter it out, and modern incubators, all the modern technology, but the food that you're growing it on, if there's a certain need to get them to shift into the so-called filterable forms, then you have to go back and follow through on whatever they were doing.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, it's fascinating. We're getting close to our session, so I'll just see whether we've covered all the questions. This viewer has asked, when did John Crane join, start working with Rife? Do you know what year he started?
It was in 1950 that he first came in contact with Rife, because Rife was selling, I think, a silver-plated drafting set. It was like a really beautiful drafting set, and I think he had it on display in some shop. And Crane wanted it, so he got in contact with Rife and heard Rife's story, and he decided he was going to he's going to follow through and try and resurrect it.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Another person is interested in the later years of Royal Rife. He was very productive when he was younger. He made his equipment, he did his tests and came up with results. But and he lived to in his 70s. But what happened to him in the later years?
Well, he closed his laboratory down in 1946 because his eyes actually got damaged. His eyesight, spending so much time at the microscope, his vision started failing, and so he couldn't really do any work. And then he kind of gave it up, and then in 1946 retired. And so he lived out his retirement, didn't do a whole lot. He still, I believe, right to pretty much his death, he was an alcoholic. We know that the strain and the stress and strain of the court trial in 1939, he was advised to use a little bit of alcohol to calm his nerves, but that turned into full-blown alcoholism, and I believe that he carried that problem right to the end. So what can you do?
Okay, well, we've touched on the court case, but we haven't explained to people what the court case was about. Why was he going to court?
Well, once they had developed the technology sufficiently, and he felt that, well, it wasn't actually him, he was approached with the idea of putting it into production. And he stipulated some conditions, and they formed a corporation. They actually, to expedite matters, they renamed an existing corporation. And so they brought in, I believe they brought in some baggage with that existing corporation that ended up being a problem. And so as they were producing some machines, they were bringing a little bit of revenue in, but then there was some shady business going on with the sale of shares, and that ultimately caused conflict. There was also some issues with not providing the British that they had a contract with the information that was agreed upon. And there's also claims that some outsiders tried to buy into the corporation, which was not allowed at the time because it was a closed corporation. So I think there was some weird things going on from a few different angles. And then Philip Hoyland felt that for his best interests, that he had to bring the matter to court so that he could protect his own interests, and that ultimately bankrupted the corporation. Um, the lawyer for the Beam Race Corporation claimed, he said, we couldn't sell these machines so that they would stay sold. So there may have been some reliability issues with them. There are some claims that that some of the doctors that were using them were threatened by the medical authorities in the establishment. So that, was the ruination. And then, of course, in 1939, the war started out. So that would put a big damper on things as well. So all those things together destroyed the company, and there was no, by the time the war was over, Rife was retired, and that was the end of the matter.
During the court case, the stress of the court case turned Royal Rife to alcohol. Did he have any friends around him to support him at that time?
He did, and I think, there was efforts. I'll tell you one thing. I heard Dr. Gross. He said they despised John Crane, and he claimed that John Crane sort of facilitated Rife's continued alcoholism. I don't know if that's true or not. What the details are, but apparently, a lot of the people that knew Rife in the earlier days, they despised John Crane. So you can take that for what it's worth.
It's very sad. The story could have had a much better ending. I can think of several ways that it could have ended much better. But for a man that's achieved so much, to become an alcoholic and die, without.
Yes, but sometimes these genius types, inventors, sometimes they're their own worst enemy. I mean, we always sing Rife's praises that he did this and he was a great man, which are all true, but he had his faults as well. And, I think in some ways he was a little naive. I think sometimes people that are gifted in one area are deficient in other areas. Like I've touched on before, I think that he should have approached his research differently, and he should have published more so that, every step of the way he's bringing it forward. He should have perhaps concentrated harder on getting the microscope into production. Maybe he could have sold the patent to a microscope company, and they could have put it into production. So there's a lot of things that Rife could have done and maybe should have done that he didn't do. For instance, there's one letter where Dr. Johnson is kind of scolding him like he was a child, because he would take unopened letters that were sent to him and throw them in the garbage. And Dr. Johnson said, "You can't do that." And he said, I think something, "You're all grown up now." And he said, "Appoint Mrs. Rife as your secretary to open all your mail and prioritize it," that sort of thing. So, like I said, sometimes these genius types, they kind of sabotage themselves in some ways.
It could be also, Jason, he just didn't have the time because he's developing microscopes and frequency treatment devices and everything.
Well, yes. Yes, absolutely. That too, yeah, he was obviously a very busy man, so he had constraints on his time. Like I said, there's so many, because when we talk about Rife, if you read Barry Lyon's book and everything's nice and tidy and orderly, like it's a, uncut and dry situation, but there's far more facets to it, and it's more complex than, it's not as tidy as we would like it to be. And there are still many, many unanswered questions. Some we may never know. But as far as the technology itself, we understand what his methodology was. we have modern technology that can do as much or better. I mean, we're sitting here over 80 years later, and we're looking back to the original frequency machines as the gold standard. I mean, if you analogize that to the Model T Ford automobile, does any auto enthusiast look at the Model T as the pinnacle of automotive technology, right? You know, you had a crude frequency instrument that did so much, and 80 years later, we still haven't, at least we still haven't been able to prove it, that we can do the same thing. So that's why research is where it's at.
Well, this is leading to more questions again, Jason, but we've run out of time. The things I'd like to ask you are more like technical things, precisely leading on from what you've just said now, how they ignited the tube and how they drove the gas tubes.
Mm-hmm.
This session was more Royal Rife than life, and so it's really sad, when you hear the fate of Royal Rife and really what his legacy is now and what we're doing with it. Where I think if people can learn to share their knowledge and to work together, and try and possibly disregard a lot of the theories that are floating around and focus on the facts.
Well, yes, and to, we have to differentiate between any hypotheses that we might have, any personal ideas, any personal philosophies, and what Rife was doing. I mean, we have to just simply make the differentiation because, as I've pointed out elsewhere, that Rife's name and legacy has accumulated all this baggage that has nothing to do with Rife. And that also diminishes the credibility of what Rife was doing, but it has nothing to do with anything that he did. It's just all the extraneous things that have been added to it. So it's not beyond the reach. If Rife was able to do it with the technology that he had at the time, then we should be able to do it today and even better. We just have to get moving on it and move forward.
Well, you've heard it from the man. That's what we have to do. Thank you so much, Jason, for coming on.
Okay.
I've really enjoyed our talk,
Yeah.
and I've learned a lot. I'm sure our viewers have as well. It's refreshing to hear your perspective, and you've spent 30 years doing your research. You obviously know a lot of things that are relating to Rife, and I'm hoping to twist your arm to get you on hopefully next week, viewers. It may be on a different day next week because
Okay.
I'll be in a different country. But thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you on the next episode of SAMA.
Okay.
Goodbye.
Thank you for having me.
It's been a pleasure.